After my wife passed away, we had the inheritance meeting. My daughter-in-law smiled coldly and said that now that the old woman is gone, I would put the company in her son's name and fend for myself. I smiled back. But when my lawyer walked into the room, he did not pull out a checkbook. He pulled out a document that would change everything. He read the DNA test out loud. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth. My name is Gordon Blake, and for 40 years I built skyscrapers that pierced the clouds of Chicago, yet I could not see the collapse of my own foundation until the earth was already sliding out from under me. It started the moment the first shovel of dirt hit the mahogany casket of my wife Martha. The rain was falling in thin gray sheets over the private cemetery. It was the kind of weather Martha loved, the kind she used to say washed the world clean. But nothing felt clean today. Around me stood 50 people in black coats holding umbrellas that cost more than my father made in a year. They were business partners, board members, people who came to be seen, not to grieve. Standing right beside me, shivering in a dress that was perhaps a bit too short for a funeral, was Stephanie, my daughter-in-law. She was not crying. She was checking her phone, hiding the screen behind her black clutch. My son Connor stood on my other side. He looked somber, but his eyes were darting around the crowd, scanning the faces of potential investors. I reached out to hold his hand, a reflex from when he was a boy, and scared of thunder. He pulled away, pretending to adjust his tie. That small rejection stung worse than the cold wind. Then, as the priest said the final amen, Stephanie leaned in close to me. Her perfume was overpowering, a sharp floral scent that made me nauseous. I expected a word of comfort. I expected her to say she would miss Martha. Instead, her hot breath hit my ear. "You need to pull yourself together, Gordon. We cannot have you looking weak in front of the shareholders. And by the way, I have already called the facility in Florida. The one near the swamps. It is cheaper than the one in the city. Now that the old woman is gone, we need to streamline our expenses. You will sign the company over to Connor next week, and then you can go down south and rot in the sun." She pulled back and patted my arm gently for the cameras, offering a sad smile to the watching crowd. The audacity of it took my breath away. My wife was not even in the ground yet, and she was already shipping me off to die. I wanted to scream. I wanted to push her into the mud. But I had spent 40 years in boardrooms negotiating with sharks. I knew that you never strike when you are bleeding. You wait. I looked at her, blinking my eyes as if I were confused, as if the grief had scrambled my brain. I did not say a word. I just nodded slowly, letting my jaw hang loose, playing the part of the broken, senile old man she wanted to see. She smirked at Connor, a tiny victorious twitch of her lips. They thought I was finished. They had no idea I was just getting started. The ride back to the estate was a masterclass in isolation. I sat in the back of the limousine, staring out at the rain-streaked window. Connor and Stephanie sat opposite me, facing backward. They should have been comforting me. We should have been sharing stories about Martha, about her laugh, about her terrible cooking that we all pretended to love. Instead, the silence was absolute. Connor had his iPad out. I could see the reflection in the glass. He was not looking at family photos. He was looking at the stock market ticker for Blake and Associates. The stock had dipped 2 points upon the news of Martha's death. "Damn it," Connor muttered under his breath. "The market is jittery. We need to make a statement soon. We need to show them there is new blood at the helm." Stephanie placed a hand on his knee. "Don't worry, honey. Once the transfer is official on Friday, we will rebrand. We will announce the tech pivot. The stock will soar. We just need to get the signature." She said it as if I were not there, as if I were a piece of furniture that needed to be moved to the basement. I closed my eyes and let my head loll to the side, feigning sleep. "Is he out?" Connor whispered. "Yeah, look at him," Stephanie replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "He is pathetic. I don't know how he ran a company for so long. He can barely tie his own shoes without Martha. He is going to be a burden, Connor. A heavy one. That is why Florida is the best option. Out of sight, out of mind. I kept my breathing steady, counting the beats of my breaking heart. 1, 2, 3. Every word they said was a deposit into a bank account of rage that I was about to withdraw from. When we arrived at the mansion, the atmosphere shifted from somber to festive with jarring speed. It was supposed to be a reception for close family and friends. Instead, it looked like a corporate networking event. Waiters were passing around champagne and shrimp cocktails. People were laughing, exchanging business cards, talking about mergers and acquisitions. I walked into the foyer, shaking the rain from my coat. No one offered to take it. The butler, old Mr. Henderson, was nowhere to be seen. I later found out Stephanie had fired him that morning to save money on catering staff. I wandered through the crowd, feeling like a ghost in the house I had built. I saw faces, I recognized men I had mentored, women I had promoted. They nodded at me, offering quick, hollow condolences before turning back to the people who mattered now, Connor and Stephanie. They were holding court in the center of the living room, clinking glasses. I needed air. I needed to see Martha. I made my way toward the fireplace in the great hall. Above the mantel hung a large oil painting Martha had done years ago. It was a landscape of the lake house we rented the summer Connor turned 10. It wasn't a masterpiece, the perspective was a little off, and the colors were too bright, but it was the heart of this room. It was the memory of the last time we were truly happy, before the money got too big, before Connor went to boarding school. I froze. The space above the mantel was empty. The painting was gone. In its place hung a large, glossy architectural blueprint. It was a rendering of a shopping mall complex. I felt a surge of adrenaline cut through my grief. I looked around wildly. In the corner near the service entrance, I saw a stack of items meant for the trash. There, leaning against a garbage bag, was Martha's canvas. The frame was cracked. I walked over, my hands trembling, not from age, but from fury. I reached down to pick it up. "Leave it, Gordon." The voice was sharp. I turned to see Stephanie sipping a mimosa. She didn't call me Dad. She didn't call me Mr. Blake. Just Gordon. "That thing clashes with the new aesthetic," she said, gesturing around the room with her glass. "We are redoing the interior next week. Modern minimalism, grays and whites. That amateur finger painting makes the room look cheap. We need to impress the investors, not bore them with sentimental trash." I stood up, hugging the painting to my chest. "This is my wife's work," I said, my voice low. "This is my house." "Not for long," she whispered, stepping closer so only I could hear. "And honestly, it's ugly." Martha had no talent. She was just a bored housewife with too much time and your money to waste. Do yourself a favor. Let it go. Just like you need to let go of the company. You are embarrassing yourself holding on to the past. She reached out and flicked the canvas with a manicured nail. The sound was like a gunshot in my head. "Go upstairs, Gordon. Go take a nap. You look tired. And you smell like old rain." She turned on her heel and walked back to the party, laughing as she greeted a banker from Chase. I stood there clutching the broken frame, realizing that to her I was just another piece of trash waiting to be taken out. I carried the painting to my study, my sanctuary. But even the hallway felt hostile. As I passed Connor's old bedroom, the door was slightly ajar. I heard his voice. He wasn't crying. He wasn't mourning. He was shouting. I stopped. I leaned against the wall, the painting heavy in my arms. "Listen to me, Vinny," I heard Connor say. "I know the deadline is tomorrow. I know. Stop threatening me. The old man is going to sign." "Yes, the liquidity is coming." $3 million. Yeah, I can cover the $3 million. The inheritance isn't just the company. It's the insurance policy, the real estate, everything. I held my breath. Vinnie Connor didn't know anyone named Vinnie in the business world. The tone of his voice was desperate, terrified. "Just give me 48 hours, Connor pleaded. "Once I have power of attorney, I can access the offshore accounts. I will wire you the cash. Just don't call the house again. My wife is suspicious enough as it is." He hung up. I heard him pacing the room, muttering curses. My back slid down the wall. $3 million. My son was in debt. Deep debt. Suddenly a memory flashed in my mind. 1995. The winter was harsh. I had just started the company and cash flow was tight. Connor wanted to go to that elite private school in Connecticut. The tuition was astronomical. Martha and I sat at the kitchen table counting pennies. I looked at her, and then I walked out to the garage. I sold my 1969 Mustang, the car I had restored with my own hands, for 5 years. I sold it for cash to pay for his first semester. I walked to work for 2 years after that. I did it because I wanted him to have the best. I wanted him to be better than me. And now he was selling me out to pay off a gambling debt or a loan shark. He wasn't taking the company to grow it. He was taking it to gut it. He was going to strip Blake and Associates for parts to save his own skin. I stood up. My knees cracked, but my spine felt straighter than it had in years. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my gut, but the fog was lifting. They thought they were dealing with a senile old man. They forgot that I was the one who taught them how to hunt. I went into my study and locked the door. I placed Martha's painting on my desk, propping it up against a stack of books. I sat down and waited. I knew they would come. It didn't take long. 20 minutes later, the doorknob jiggled. Then a sharp knock. "Gordon, open up. It's Stephanie." I didn't answer immediately. I took a slow breath, composing my face into the mask of the defeated widower. I unlocked the door and opened it a crack. Stephanie pushed past me, carrying a thick leather binder. Connor followed her, looking pale and sweaty. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "We need to get this done," Stephanie said, slamming the binder onto my mahogany desk right next to Martha's painting. She looked at the painting with disgust, but didn't say anything about it. She flipped the binder open to a page flagged with a yellow sticky note. Here, she pointed. "Sign here, and here, and initial here." "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. I made sure to let my hand shake as I reached for my reading glasses. "It's the standard transfer protocol," Connor said quickly, his voice high and tight. "Just like we discussed, Dad. It moves the operational control to me, so you don't have to worry about the stress. The board is pushing for it. They are worried about your health." "My health?" I asked. "I had a physical last month. I am fit as a fiddle." Stephanie sighed, a loud, dramatic exhale. "Physically, maybe. But mentally, Gordon, let's be honest. You forgot to wear a tie to the funeral today. You were talking to yourself in the limo. You are slipping. We are doing this to protect you." I looked down at my shirt. I was wearing a tie, a black silk tie. Martha bought it for me. Stephanie was gaslighting me, rewriting reality right in front of my face. "And if I don't sign?" I asked softly. Stephanie's face hardened. The mask of the concerned daughter-in-law dropped completely. She leaned over the desk, her hands flat on the wood. "If you don't sign," she hissed, "then you will never see Tyler again." The room went cold. Tyler. My grandson. My only grandson. The 5-year-old boy with the bright laugh, who was the only light left in my life. What I whispered. "You heard me," she said. "I have sole custody rights. If you become difficult, if you drag this out, I will file a restraining order. I will tell the judge you are senile and dangerous. I will say you have violent outbursts. You will die in that nursing home without ever seeing his face again. Do you want that? Do you want to die alone?" Gordon Connor looked away, studying the pattern on the rug. He was letting her do this. He was letting her use his son as a weapon against his father. I looked at the pen she had placed on the document. It was a Mont Blanc. My Mont Blanc. The one I used to sign the contract for the Sears Tower renovation. I reached out and took the pen. My hand shook violently. I looked at Connor. "Son," I asked, "is this what you want?" Connor swallowed hard. "Just sign it, Dad. Please, it's for the best." I lowered the pen to the paper. The tip hovered over the signature line. Stephanie was practically vibrating with anticipation. I could see the greed in her eyes, hungry and raw. I pressed the pen down. Ink bled into the paper, but I didn't write my name. I drew a line. A slow, shaky line through the paragraph. I can't, I stammered, dropping the pen. My hand, it hurts too much. The arthritis. I need to rest. Stephanie slammed her hand on the desk. "You old fool. Pick up the pen, I can't." I cried out, shrinking back into my chair, making myself look small. "Please, just give me a few days. My head is spinning. Martha, I just miss Martha." Stephanie looked ready to strike me. She raised her hand, and for a second I thought she would. But Connor grabbed her wrist. "Stop, Steph. Not here." She ripped her arm away. "Fine," she spat. "You have 3 days, Gordon. 3 days to mourn. On Friday morning we have a board meeting. You will walk in there, and you will announce your retirement, and you will sign these papers in front of everyone. If you don't, I swear on your wife's grave I will have you declared incompetent and locked away before lunch." She grabbed the binder and stormed out of the room. Connor lingered for a second. He looked at me, and I saw a flicker of shame. But then he remembered the $3 million he owed Vinny, and the shame vanished. He turned and followed his wife, closing the door behind him. I sat in the silence of the study. The trembling in my hands stopped instantly. I sat up straight. I reached for the phone, but then stopped. They would be monitoring the house line. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a burner phone I had bought a month ago, ever since I noticed money missing from the petty cash accounts. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Evan," I said when the voice answered. "Mr. Blake, is everything okay?" Evan asked. He was my personal assistant, a kid from the wrong side of the tracks, whom I had hired 5 years ago. He was loyal, smart, and the only person in the company who actually worked. "No, Evan. Everything is not okay. I need you to do something for me, and you can't tell anyone, not even HR." "Anything, sir. I need you to meet me at the back gate in 1 hour. Bring the master key to the server room, and bring a DNA collection kit." "A DNA kit, sir. Just do it, Evan. And bring a black hoodie. We are going to work." I hung up the phone. I looked at Martha's painting one last time. "Don't worry, my love," I whispered to the canvas. "They want a show on Friday. I will give them a show." I stood up and walked to the window, watching the rain turn into a storm. The old Gordon Blake, the grieving widower, had died in that limo. The man standing in the window was the architect, and I was about to design their destruction. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in deception. I had spent my life designing structures that could withstand earthquakes and hurricanes, but the hardest thing I ever built was the facade of a broken, senile old man. I perfected the shuffle. It is harder than it looks to walk like your joints are rusted shut, when in reality you still run 3 miles on the treadmill when no one is watching. I let my jaw go slack. I stared at walls as if I were watching paint dry. I intentionally spilled a glass of water at breakfast just to watch Stephanie roll her eyes and sigh that dramatic suffering sigh of hers. The house, my sanctuary for 30 years, began to change rapidly. It started with the silence. The vibrant hum of a well-run home vanished. On Tuesday morning, I woke up not to the smell of fresh coffee and bacon, but to the sound of arguing in the driveway. I moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just an inch. Down below, Mr. Henderson, our gardener of 20 years, was loading his tools into his battered truck. Henderson wasn't just an employee. He was the man who helped me plant the oak tree when Tyler was born. He was the one who sat with me on the porch drinking iced tea when Martha was in chemo. Neither of us saying a word because there were no words to say. Stephanie stood by the gate, her arms crossed, tapping her foot. I saw Henderson pleading. He took off his cap, twisting it in his rough hands. I could not hear the words through the glass, but I knew the body language of a man begging for his livelihood. Stephanie just shook her head, handed him a white envelope that looked too thin to contain a proper severance, and pointed to the street. I waited until the front door slammed. I shuffled down the stairs, clutching the banister with two hands, making sure my steps were uneven. Stephanie was in the foyer, already on the phone. So much fat to trim, she was saying into her headset. Yes, the gardening service is gone. We can hire a crew once a month for maintenance. No one needs fresh flowers cut every day. It is a waste of capital. She hung up when she saw me. Her face didn't soften. It didn't even register recognition. It was like looking at a piece of furniture that had been moved out of place. "Where is Mr. Henderson?" I asked, my voice raspy. I kept my eyes unfocused, looking somewhere past her left shoulder. "He retired, Gordon," she lied effortlessly. The lie came out as smooth as silk. He said he was too old to keep up with the grounds. He wanted to move to Arizona. I gripped the banister tighter. Henderson hated the heat. He once told me he would rather shovel snow until he died than live in a desert. But he didn't say goodbye, I mumbled, letting a tremor enter my lower lip. "He didn't want to disturb you," she said, checking her watch. "He knows you get confused. It is better this way. Now come into the kitchen. We need to discuss your diet." My diet: I had eaten steak and potatoes 3 nights a week for 50 years. My cholesterol was lower than Connor's. In the kitchen, the chef was gone too. In his place was a stack of pre-packaged meal containers on the counter. Connor was sitting at the island, eating a bagel, looking at his laptop. He didn't look up when I entered. "We are switching things up," Stephanie announced, opening the fridge. It was remarkably empty. The imported cheeses were gone. The wine rack was bare. "We need to be more fiscally responsible until the transfer is complete. And honestly, Gordon, at your age, rich foods are just a liability." She placed a plastic bowl in front of me. It contained something that looked like oatmeal but smelled like wet cardboard. "What is this?" I asked. "Porridge," she said. "Easy to digest. Good for the heart. We don't want you having a stroke before Friday, do we?" I sat down. The humiliation was physical. It felt like a tight band around my chest. I looked at Connor. "Son," I said, "is this all we have?" Connor finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "Just eat it, Dad," he snapped. His voice lacked its usual confidence. It was brittle. "Steph says we need to cut overhead. The estate costs $20,000 a month to run. We don't have that kind of cash flow right now. Not until, not until I signed. Not until died." I picked up the spoon. I forced myself to eat a mouthful of the tasteless sludge. I needed to keep my strength up. I needed them to think I was compliant. I was not eating porridge. I was eating my pride, swallowing it down one spoonful at a time so it could fuel the fire in my gut. But the food and the staff were just the beginning. The isolation was the real weapon. They were stripping away my support system layer by layer until I was just an island in a sea of their ambition. That afternoon, I decided to test the boundaries of my prison. I heard laughter coming from the backyard. It was Tyler. My heart leaped. I hadn't seen my grandson since the funeral. I missed his energy, his innocent questions, the way he would run into my study and demand I draw him a castle. I needed to see him. I needed to remember why I was fighting. I walked to the French doors that led to the patio. I saw him near the fountain playing with a remote-controlled car. A nanny I didn't recognize was sitting on a bench scrolling through her phone. I opened the door. The fresh air hit my face. "Tyler," I called out, putting a smile on my face, dropping the act for just a second. "Hey, buddy, Grandpa is here." Tyler looked up. He smiled that wide, gap-toothed smile that usually melted my heart. He took a step toward me. "Grandpa," he shouted. But before he could take another step, Stephanie appeared from nowhere. She must have been watching from the kitchen window. She rushed out, her heels clicking aggressively on the stone patio. She intercepted Tyler, grabbing him by the shoulder and spinning him around. "No, Tyler, go inside with the nanny." Now she ordered. "But I want to see Grandpa," Tyler whined, trying to look back at me. I said now. Stephanie's voice was sharp, a whip crack that made the boy flinch. The nanny jumped up, grabbed Tyler's hand, and practically dragged him toward the side entrance. I watched him disappear, his confused face looking back at me over his shoulder. I stood there, stunned. Stephanie turned to face me. Her face was flushed with anger, but beneath the anger I saw something else. Panic. "What are you doing?" she hissed, marching toward me. "I told you to stay inside." "I just wanted to say hello to my grandson," I said, allowing my voice to rise, injecting a note of genuine hurt. "Why are you keeping him away from me? Is that budget cuts too? Does it cost money to get a hug? You scare him." "Gordon," she shouted. I blinked. That was a lie so bold it took a moment to process. "Scare him? We were building Lego towers last week. He loves me. He is confused." She pressed on her hands, balling into fists. "You are walking around like a zombie. You are muttering to yourself. You smell like old age and sickness. Tyler is sensitive. He had nightmares after the funeral because of how you looked. I am protecting him from seeing his grandfather deteriorate." She poked a finger into my chest. "Stay away from him. If I catch you near him again, I will lock you in your room. Do you understand? I will treat you like the invalid you are acting like." She turned and stormed back into the house, slamming the French doors so hard the glass rattled. I stood alone on the patio. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the oak tree Henderson had planted. "You scare him." The words echoed in my head, but they didn't ring true. I had seen Tyler's face. He wasn't scared of me. He was happy to see me. Why was she so terrified of us being together? It wasn't just about me being senile. Stephanie was a control freak, yes, but this level of guarding was irrational. Unless there was something she didn't want me to see, or something she didn't want Tyler to say. I remembered the conversation I had overheard in Connor's room. The desperation, the debt, and now this aggressive separation. A thought struck me cold and sharp. It wasn't about protecting Tyler from me. It was about protecting Tyler from the truth, or protecting the truth from me. I turned and looked up at the second-floor window of the nursery. The blinds were drawn. I wasn't just a senile old man to them. I was a liability. But why was the boy a liability? I walked back inside, my shuffle gone for a moment. I went straight to my study. I locked the door. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark thinking about bloodlines, about legacies, and about the secrets people keep to secure them. If they wouldn't let me see the boy, I would have to find another way to understand what was happening. I needed evidence. And since they had taken away my access to the living, I would have to start digging into the data. I pulled the burner phone from my pocket. It was time to call Evan again. The act of the helpless old man was over for the night. The architect was going to work. Tonight, we were going to break into the one place they thought was secure, the digital heart of the family empire. And I had a feeling that what I would find there would be far worse than a few missing dollars. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 2 in the morning. The sound vibrated through the floorboards, deep and ominous, like the heartbeat of the dying house. I sat on the edge of my bed, fully dressed in black, listening to the silence. My own house, the sanctuary I had built with my own hands to protect my family, had turned into enemy territory. Every creak of the wood, every hum of the refrigerator downstairs sounded like a threat. I checked my burner phone. A single text message from Evan. I am at the service entrance. I stood up. My knees popped a reminder of my age, but I ignored the pain. I moved to the door of my bedroom and cracked it open. The hallway was empty. A nightlight plugged into the wall cast a long, eerie shadow across the portrait of Connor that hung at the top of the stairs. In the painting, he was 12 years old, smiling, holding a model airplane. The boy who loved to fly. I looked at that innocent face and tried to find traces of the man who was currently sleeping down the hall, the man who was selling me out for a quick payday. I couldn't find him. That boy was gone. I slipped into the hallway. I didn't shuffle this time. I walked on the balls of my feet, a trick I learned not in business school, but from sneaking out as a teenager to meet Martha. I moved past Connor and Stephanie's suite. I could hear the faint drone of a white noise machine coming from inside. They were sleeping soundly, dreaming of their millions, while I crept through the shadows like a thief. I made it to the kitchen without making a sound. The service door was unlocked. Evan was waiting in the rain, his hood pulled up. When he saw me, he stepped inside, dripping wet, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. "Mr. Blake," he whispered, wiping water from his face. "You shouldn't be doing this. If they catch you..." "If they catch me," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, "I will just pretend I am sleepwalking. I am the senile old man. Remember, I am just looking for my lost marbles. Did you bring the drive?" He nodded and patted his backpack. "I have the decryption software you asked for. But sir, the firewall on the private server is military grade. You paid for it yourself." "I know," I said, leading him toward the library. "I built the wall. I know where the loose brick is." We entered the library. This was the nerve center. Behind a false panel in the oak bookshelf lay the entrance to the server room. It was a small, climate-controlled space where I kept the physical backups of the company's deepest data. Connor knew about the server, of course, but he was too lazy to understand how it worked. He thought the cloud was magic. He didn't understand that real power is something you can touch. I pressed the hidden latch. The panel slid open with a soft hiss. We stepped inside. The room was bathed in the cool blue glow of the server racks. The hum of the cooling fans was louder here, masking our breathing. Evan plugged his laptop into the main terminal. His fingers flew across the keyboard. I stood behind him, watching the lines of code scroll past. It was like watching a surgeon cut into a patient. We were cutting into the body of my life's work to see how bad the cancer was. "We are," and Evan said after a tense minute. "I am accessing the transaction logs for the last 24 months. Show me the withdrawals I ordered. Filter by authorization code. Look for anything flagged as miscellaneous or external consulting." The screen refreshed. A list appeared. It was long. Too long. I leaned closer, squinting without my glasses. The numbers were staggering. $50,000 to a consulting firm in Nevada. $100,000 to a real estate developer in Dubai that didn't exist. $200,000 in crypto transfers. "Click on the crypto transfers," I said, my chest tightening. "Where did they go?" Evan tapped a few keys. "The trail is obfuscated, sir." "But, wait. Here is a recurring IP address. It is a gambling platform. An unregulated exchange based in Malta." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. It wasn't just bad investments. It wasn't just a failed startup. My son was gambling away the company. He was bleeding us dry at a roulette table or a sports betting app. "Keep scrolling," I whispered. Then I saw it. A transfer dated 3 days ago. $3 million. Status pending. "That is it," Evan said, pointing at the screen. That is the liquidity they are waiting for. They initiated a transfer from the employee pension fund. My blood ran cold. The pension fund. That was the retirement money for 300 employees, people like Henderson, people who had given me decades of their lives. Stealing from me was one thing. Stealing from them was a crime I could not forgive. It is pending your signature, Evan noted. The bank's fail-safe halted it because it exceeds the pre-authorized limit for the VP. They need the chairman's override. They need me, I realized. That is why they need the power of attorney. They aren't just paying off debt. They are trying to cover up a federal crime before the audit next week. Copy everything I said, my voice hard as steel. Every log, every email, every deleted file. I want it all. Evan nodded and started the download. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 20%. 30%. Suddenly the silence of the house was broken. Footsteps. Heavy, uneven footsteps coming from the floor above. They were directly over the library. Evan froze his hand, hovering over the keyboard. Someone is up, he mouthed. I held up a hand. I listened. The footsteps moved to the stairs, then down the stairs. Connor. He was coming down. Maybe he needed water. Maybe he couldn't sleep because of the guilt, though I doubted he had enough conscience for that. The footsteps got louder. They were on the hardwood floor of the hallway now. They were getting closer to the library. Turn off the screen, I hissed. Evan slapped the laptop shut. The blue glow vanished. We were plunged into darkness, lit only by the tiny blinking LEDs of the server rack. The footsteps stopped right outside the library door. I held my breath. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard, I was afraid he could hear it through the wall. I pictured Connor standing there, hand on the doorknob, wondering why he heard a noise. The doorknob turned. I watched the brass handle slowly rotate in the sliver of light coming from under the door. It locked. I had locked it from the inside. A rookie mistake or a saving grace. If he had a key, we were dead. If he thought it was just stuck, maybe we had a chance. Dad. Connor's voice came through the wood. It was thick with sleep and suspicion. Dad, are you in there? I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I pressed my back against the cold metal of the server rack. Evan was crouched under the desk, trembling. Connor rattled the handle. Harder this time. What the hell, he muttered. I needed to make a choice. If I stayed silent, he might get the key. If I answered, I had to sell the performance of a lifetime. I let out a low, confused moan, a sound of disorientation. Dad. Connor called again, sharper this time. I shuffled toward the door, making sure my feet dragged on the floor. I unlocked it and opened it just a crack. The hallway light blinded me. I squinted, putting a hand up to shield my eyes. Connor was standing there in his boxers and a t-shirt, holding a glass of water. He looked angry and confused. What are you doing? He asked, trying to peer into the dark room behind me. Why is the door locked? I couldn't find the bathroom, I stammered, letting my voice crack. I turned the wrong way. The door, it got stuck. Where is Martha? She usually leaves the light on for me. Connor let out a breath of frustration. He ran a hand through his hair. Martha is dead, Dad. Jesus, how many times do we have to tell you, dead? I asked, letting my face crumble into grief. No, she was just here. I heard her. She was in the library. I stepped aside, gesturing into the darkness. Evan was hidden behind the desk, invisible unless Connor walked all the way in. Do you want to check? I asked innocently. Maybe she is hiding. Connor looked into the dark abyss of the library. He shivered. The air coming out of the room was cold from the server cooling system. Go to bed, Dad, he said, backing away. There is no one there. You are having a nightmare. I looked at him, my eyes wide and watery. But the numbers, Connor. I whispered, planting a seed of madness. The numbers are eating the pension. I heard them chewing. He froze. For a second, I saw terror in his eyes. Did he understand? Did he know that I knew? But then he shook his head. You are crazy, he muttered. Totally gone. Go to sleep before you wake up, Steph. She won't be as nice as me. He turned and walked back toward the kitchen. I watched him go. I waited until I heard the refrigerator door open and close, then the heavy footsteps going back up the stairs, then the bedroom door clicking shut. I closed the library door and locked it again. My legs almost gave out. I leaned against the doorframe, gasping for air. Evan crawled out from under the desk. He was pale. That was close, he whispered. Too close, I agreed. But we bought ourselves time. Did the download finish? Evan opened the laptop. The screen flickered to life. Download complete. 100%. I looked at the drive in his hand. It was small, silver, and cold, but it held enough heat to burn this entire family to the ground. Take it, I said. Get out the way you came. Do not stop. Do not go home. Go to the safe house we discussed. Wait for my signal on Friday. What about you? Sir Evan asked, looking at me with concern. You can't stay here with them. They are dangerous. I straightened my back. The senile old man was gone again. I am not staying with them, Evan. I am staying with my memories. And right now my memory is very, very long. Go. Evan slipped out the service door into the rain. I stood alone in the dark kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, drinking it slowly. Connor thought I was having a nightmare. He was wrong. I was the nightmare. And on Friday, he was going to wake up screaming. The blue light of the laptop screen was the only thing illuminating the library, casting long, ghostly shadows across the rows of leather-bound books. My heart was still pounding from Connor's visit, but the fear was quickly being replaced by a cold, hard knot of nausea. Evan was sitting on the floor, his back against the desk, typing furiously. I pulled up a chair, my eyes scanning the lines of data that were scrolling past, like a waterfall of secrets. This was not just accounting. This was an autopsy of my legacy. Look at this, Evan whispered, pointing to a column of red numbers. The $3 million didn't go out in one lump sum. It was bled out. Over 18 months. Small transfers at first. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Just enough to stay under the radar of the automated alerts. But then 6 months ago, right around the time Martha got sick, the dam broke. I leaned in, squinting at the screen. The dates aligned perfectly with Martha's chemotherapy sessions. While I was holding my wife's hand in the hospital, watching the life fade from her eyes, my son was draining the company's lifeblood. Where did it go? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Evan opened a second window. It is complex, sir. They used a series of shell companies. Jupiter Consulting, Blue Sky Logistics. But look at the routing numbers. They all funnel back to one offshore entity in the Cayman Islands. And from there, into the crypto exchange I showed you earlier. I felt a wave of dizziness. My son wasn't investing in a bad startup. He was gambling. He was throwing millions of dollars into the digital void, chasing a high that would never come. I remembered the nights he came home late, eyes wide and manic, talking about how he was going to revolutionize the industry. He wasn't revolutionizing anything. He was spiraling. But that was not the worst part. Evan clicked on a folder labeled Authorizations. Sir Evan said, his voice shaking, "You need to see this." He pulled up a digital copy of a withdrawal slip for $200,000. It was dated last month. At the bottom of the slip was a signature. It was my signature. I stared at it. It was perfect. The loop on the G, the sharp slant of the B. If I didn't know better, I would have sworn I signed it myself. But I knew I hadn't. On that date, I was at the cemetery picking out a headstone for Martha. They forged it, I said. It is not just one, Evan said, scrolling down. There are dozens of them, every single illegal transfer, every withdrawal from the pension fund, every disastrous crypto trade. They are all signed by Gordon Blake. I sat back, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place, forming a picture so ugly I wanted to look away. But I couldn't. This wasn't just theft. Theft is simple. Theft is greedy. This was something far more sinister. They aren't just stealing the money. Evan, I said the words tasting like ash in my mouth. They are setting me up. Evan looked at me confused. What do you mean? Think about it, I said, standing up and pacing the small space of the server room. Why are they pushing so hard for the nursing home? Why the rush? Why the constant narrative that I am senile, that I am losing my mind? I pointed at the screen. The annual audit is next week. The external auditors will come in. They will find the missing millions. They will find the empty pension fund. And when they look for the culprit, who will they find? Evan's eyes widened as the horror dawned on him. They will find your signature. Exactly, I hissed. They will find the signature of a senile old man who has been confused and acting strangely for months. A man who his loving son tried to protect by putting him in a facility. Connor gets to play the hero. He gets to say, "Oh, my poor father, the dementia made him do terrible things. I had no idea he was gambling away the company assets." I stopped pacing. I looked at my reflection in the dark monitor. I looked old. I looked tired. And that was exactly what they were counting on. They plan to pin it all on me, I continued. They will say I embezzled the money in a fit of madness. They will use the medical reports Stephanie threatened to fabricate. They will lock me away in that facility in Florida, medicate me until I actually do lose my mind, and selling the company to pay off my debts will just be seen as a tragic necessity. It was a perfect crime. They get the money, they get the company, and they get rid of me all while keeping their reputations spotless. Connor doesn't go to jail for fraud. Stephanie keeps her social standing, and Gordon Blake goes down in history as the man who destroyed his own empire because he forgot who he was. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest, replacing the fear. It was a clarifying rage. It burned away the grief. It burned away the hesitation. Evan, I said, my voice steady and low. Do we have the proof that these signatures were digital forgeries? Evan typed rapidly. I can trace the metadata. Yes. Look here. The timestamps on the signatures match the creation times of these PDF files on Connor's laptop. He didn't scan a physical paper. He used a digital stamp of your signature. I can prove these files were created on his device using his login credentials. Good, I said. Copy it. Copy it all. Make 3 backups. Put one on a cloud server they can't touch. Put one on this drive. And send one to my personal lawyer, Caldwell. Encrypted. Evan initiated the transfer. Sir, if we have this, we can go to the police now. We can stop them. No, I said. Not yet. Why, Evan asked. This proves everything. Because if I go to the police now, it becomes a legal battle. They will hire expensive defense attorneys. They will claim I authorized Connor to use the digital stamp. It will be his word against the word of a man they have already painted as senile. It will drag on for years. I looked at the digital clock on the screen. It was 3:00 a.m. I don't want a legal battle, Evan. I want an execution. A public, undeniable execution of their lies. I need something that breaks their credibility so completely that no lie can save them. I need the boy. Evan stopped typing. Tyler, I need to know why they are hiding him, I said. The missing money is the gun. But the boy is the bullet. If they are willing to frame his grandfather for federal crimes, what are they hiding about his son? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small plastic bag I had prepared. Inside was a single strand of hair I had plucked from my own coat collar. "Tomorrow," I said. "I need you to get a sample from Tyler. I don't care how you do it. Bribe the new nanny. Sneak into his school. Just get it." Evan nodded solemnly. "I will get it, sir." The download chime pinged softly. It was done. We had the smoking gun. Now we just needed the DNA to pull the trigger. I put a hand on Evan's shoulder. "You are a good man, Evan. Better than my own blood. Now go, before the sun comes up." Evan packed his bag and vanished into the shadows of the service hallway. I stayed in the library for a moment longer. I looked at the forging of my name on the screen one last time. Gordon Blake. They thought that name belonged to a victim. They thought they could use it to sign my death warrant. I reached out and closed the laptop. On Friday, I whispered to the empty room they are going to learn exactly what that name stands for. I unlocked the library door and stepped back into the hallway. I shuffled back to my room, the floorboards creaking under my weight. As I passed Connor's door, I paused. I could hear his rhythmic snoring. He was sleeping the sleep of the wicked, confident in his victory. "Sleep well, son," I thought. "Because when you wake up, the nightmare begins. And this time I won't be there to sell my car to save you. This time I am the one driving the bus." The morning sun did not bring relief. It only brought exposure. After the revelation in the server room, I did not sleep. I sat in my leather armchair by the window, watching the gray light filter through the trees, my mind racing faster than the data streams I had witnessed the night before. I had the financial gun, the proof of embezzlement, but I still needed the bullet. I needed to know why they were hiding the boy. My suspicion had started as a gut feeling, a grandfather's intuition sparked by Stephanie's desperate need to keep us apart. But intuition is not evidence. In the world of law and trusts, intuition is worthless. I needed hard facts. I waited until I heard Connor's car leave the driveway. He was going to the office to posture for the board to play the role of the grieving heir. Stephanie usually slept late, and the new nanny was often distracted. This was my window. I made my way to the attic. It was the only place in the house Stephanie hadn't colonized yet, mostly because it was dusty and filled with things she considered junk. But for me, it was a library of lives lived. I pushed aside boxes of Christmas decorations and old winter coats until I found the filing cabinet Martha had kept. She was meticulous about records. Every vaccination, every dental appointment, every scraped knee was documented in her looping cursive script. I pulled out Connor's medical file. It was thick. I flipped through the yellowed pages until I found his birth certificate and his blood typing card from when he had his tonsils out at age 10. Connor Blake. Blood type O negative. I stared at the card. The universal donor. I remembered the doctor telling us how rare it was, how special he was. Martha was O negative too. It was a genetic quirk they shared, a bond of blood that I, with my O positive type, was excluded from. I closed the folder and tucked it under my arm. Then I went downstairs to the study. I knew Stephanie kept a disorganized pile of current paperwork on the sidebar, things she hadn't filed yet because she was too busy spending money. I shuffled through the stack invitations to galas, invoices for designer shoes, and there near the bottom, a recent insurance renewal form for Tyler. I scanned the document. Name Tyler Blake. Date of birth May 12th, 2019. Primary care physician Dr. Evans. And there it was in the small box on the second page. Blood type A, B positive. The world stopped spinning for a second. I felt the air leave my lungs. I am an architect, not a doctor, but I know the basic laws of biology. I know that a man with O negative blood and a woman, regardless of her type, cannot produce a child with AB blood. It is genetically impossible. An O parent passes on an O gene. An AB child must receive an A from one parent and a B from the other. Connor could not be Tyler's father. I sat down heavily on the sofa. The room felt suddenly small, suffocating. It wasn't just adultery. If Stephanie had an affair, that was a personal tragedy. But this was fraud on a massive scale. The Blake Family Trust, the $50 million fund that controlled the majority voting rights of the company, had a strict clause. It could only pass to a direct biological descendant. Adoption was covered by a separate, smaller fund, but the empire. The controlling interest that had to stay in the bloodline. If Connor knew, and he must know, given his own medical history, then they weren't just hiding a bastard child. They were conspiring to defraud the trust. They were presenting a child they knew had no claim to the legacy as the heir apparent, all to unlock the vault. I looked at the photo of Tyler on the mantelpiece. The wide eyes. The smile that didn't look like Connor's. I had always told myself he took after his mother. Now I knew why. I felt a surge of protectiveness. Tyler was an innocent pawn in their game. He didn't know he was a lie. He didn't know his existence was a felony in progress. But I needed proof. A piece of paper wasn't enough. Insurance forms could be clerical errors. I needed absolute biological certainty. I needed DNA. I heard the back door open. The nanny's voice drifted up from the garden. "Okay, Tyler, you can play for 20 minutes while I make a call. Stay on the grass." I stood up. My hip ached, but I ignored it. I needed a sample. A swab was impossible, but a hair. A single strand of hair, with the root attached, would be enough for the lab. I walked to the French doors. I composed my face. I had to be the doting, slightly confused grandfather again. I couldn't let them see the detective. I stepped out onto the patio. The air was crisp. Tyler was crouching near the rose bushes, digging in the dirt with a plastic shovel. The nanny was sitting on a bench 20 yards away, her back to us, talking loudly into her phone. I moved quietly. "For a big man, I can be light on my feet." I approached the boy. "Hey there, explorer," I said softly. Tyler jumped and spun around. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Grandpa!" "You came back." I knelt down, groaning slightly for effect. "I am always back for you, kiddo. What are you digging for treasure?" He held up a dirty rock. "Look, it has sparkles in it. Mommy says it is just a rock, but I think it is gold." I took the rock, turning it over in my hand. "It is definitely gold," I whispered conspiratorially. "But you have to keep it a secret. Pirates are everywhere." Tyler giggled, leaning in close. He smelled of baby shampoo and fresh grass. My heart broke for him. He was so sweet, so unsuspecting, and I was about to blow his world apart. I reached out my hand. "You have a little leaf in your hair, buddy," I said. "Hold still." This was it. I needed to be quick. I moved my fingers into his soft brown curls. I found a strand near the back of his neck. I needed to pull it quick and sharp. He would cry out maybe, but I could claim it was a tangle. I wrapped the strand around my finger. I took a breath. Suddenly the glass door behind me shattered. Not the glass itself, but the sound of it being thrown open with violent force. "Get away from him!" The scream was feral. Before I could react, before I could pull the hair, a force slammed into my shoulder. It was Stephanie. She had come out of nowhere, moving with the speed of a striking cobra. She didn't just pull me away. She shoved me. 2 hands full force against my chest. I was crouching. My balance was off. I tipped backward. My arms flailed, trying to catch the air, but gravity won. I hit the stone patio hard. My head cracked against the pavement, and a sharp bolt of pain shot up my spine. My glasses flew off, skittering across the stones. The world went blurry. Grandpa Tyler screamed, starting to cry. I groaned, trying to push myself up. My vision swam. Through the haze, I saw Stephanie standing over me. She wasn't helping me up. She was shielding Tyler, pushing his face into her stomach so he couldn't see me glaring down at me with eyes full of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Don't you touch him!" she shrieked. Her voice cracked, hysterical. I told you to stay away." I blinked, trying to focus. "Stephanie," I rasped. He had a leaf." "Liar," she spat the word at me. I saw you creeping up on him like a predator. You are sick, Gordon. You are a sick, twisted old man." The nanny was running over now, phone forgotten. "Oh my God, Mrs. Blake, is everything okay?" "Take Tyler inside," Stephanie ordered, not taking her eyes off me. "Lock the door, call security." "But, is Mr. Blake okay?" the nanny asked, looking at me lying on the ground. "He is bleeding." I reached up to the back of my head. My fingers came away red. "I don't care," Stephanie yelled. "He tried to hurt my son, him inside." The nanny grabbed a sobbing Tyler and ran into the house. I was left alone on the cold stones with the woman who wanted me dead. Stephanie took a step closer. She loomed over me, blocking out the sun. Her chest was heaving. "You are finished," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "This is it, Gordon. I warned you. I told you that if you became a problem, I would deal with you." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She didn't call an ambulance. She started taking pictures. She took a picture of me lying on the ground, disheveled, bleeding. She took a picture of the fear on her own face. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice weak. "Building the case," she said coldly. "Aggressive behavior. Endangering a child. Self-defense. By the time the police get here, you won't be the victim, Gordon. You will be the monster who attacked his grandson in a fit of dementia-induced rage." She turned and walked toward the door, stopping only to pick up my glasses. She looked at them for a second, then dropped them on the stone and crushed them under her heel. "Stay down, old man," she said. "It is over." She slammed the door and locked it. I lay there, the pain in my head throbbing in time with my heartbeat. I tasted blood in my mouth. She had won this round. She had the photos, she had the narrative, she had the physical power. But as I closed my eyes, fighting the darkness threatening to pull me under, I realized something. Her reaction. It was too extreme. It was panic. Pure, unadulterated panic. She didn't push me because she thought I was hurting him. She pushed me because she saw my hand in his hair. She knew exactly what I was looking for. She knew that I knew. I dragged myself up to a sitting position. The world spun, but my resolve hardened into diamond. "You are right, Stephanie," I whispered to the closed door. "It is over." But not for me. I didn't get the hair, but I got the confirmation. Now I just needed Evan to finish what I started. I crawled toward the edge of the patio, reaching for my burner phone hidden in my sock. I had to make the call before the police arrived. The war had just turned violent, and I was done playing by the rules. The ice pack on my shoulder was melting water dripping down my arm and soaking into the sleeve of my cardigan, but I barely felt the cold. The physical pain from the fall on the patio was nothing compared to the agony in my chest. I sat in my study, the door locked, staring at a photograph of Tyler on my desk. It was taken last Christmas. He was sitting on my lap, wearing a ridiculous reindeer sweater, his small hands clutching my fingers. I traced the curve of his smile with my thumb. "Please," I whispered to the empty room. "Please let me be wrong." For the first time in my life, I was praying to lose. I wanted the DNA test to come back as a match. I wanted to be proven a paranoid, senile old man. I wanted the doctor to tell me that biology is strange and that sometimes an O-negative father can have an AB-positive son through some miracle of mutation. I wanted to look at that boy and know that my blood ran through his veins, that he was part of Martha, part of me. But I knew the odds. And I knew Stephanie. I looked at the clock. It was 2 in the afternoon. The house was quiet. Tyler was supposedly napping. The nanny was likely in the kitchen scrolling through Instagram. Stephanie would be in her office, probably searching for luxury retirement homes that accepted patients with aggressive dementia. I needed that sample. The incident on the patio had made getting close to Tyler impossible. If I so much as looked at him, Stephanie would call the police. I could not pluck a hair from his head. I could not swab his cheek. I needed something he owned, something intimate. A toothbrush, a hairbrush, a hat he had worn all day. I stood up. My knees protested stiff from the fall, but I forced them to work. I had to leave the sanctuary of the study. I had to go into the belly of the beast. I unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway. I assumed the posture of the defeated. Shoulders slumped, head down, a slight tremor in my hands. If they saw me, they needed to see a broken man, not a man on a mission. I made my way toward the kitchen, but I didn't go in. Instead, I veered toward the laundry room. It was a small utility space off the mudroom, a place Stephanie rarely entered because she considered domestic labor beneath her. Since she had fired the housekeeper, the laundry had been piling up. This was my target. I pushed the door open. The room smelled of bleach and dirty linen. Baskets of clothes overflowed onto the tile floor. It was a mess, a symbol of the chaos that had overtaken my orderly home. I knelt down beside the hamper marked nursery. It was humiliating. I was Gordon Blake. I had designed the city skyline. I had shaken hands with presidents. And here I was, kneeling on a cold tile floor, digging through the soiled clothes of a 5-year-old like a raccoon scavenging for scraps. I sifted through the pile. Tiny socks, stained t-shirts, pajama bottoms. I felt a lump in my throat. These were the clothes I had bought him. That blue shirt with the dinosaur, I gave him that for his birthday. He had roared like a T-Rex when he opened it. If I am right, I thought, squeezing the shirt in my hand, then none of those memories are real. They are just scenes in a play written by a con artist. I pushed the thought away. Focus, Gordon. Find the hair. I dug deeper. Near the bottom of the basket, I found it. A woolen beanie. It was gray with a red pom-pom. Tyler had worn it yesterday when they went to the park. Wool is sticky. Wool holds on to things. My hands were shaking, and this time it wasn't an act. I turned the hat inside out. The lighting in the laundry room was poor, just a single fluorescent bulb buzzing overhead. I squinted, straining my eyes. There. Caught in the weave of the wool near the brim was a single fine brown hair, and next to it another one. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small Ziploc bag I had taken from the kitchen pantry earlier. I didn't have tweezers. I had to use my fingers. I held my breath, afraid that a sudden exhale would blow the precious evidence away. I pinched the hair carefully. I pulled. It came free. It was long enough. It had the follicle bulb at the end. That tiny white dot was the key to the truth. I dropped it into the bag and sealed it. I did the same with the second hair just to be safe. I had it. I started to stand up, shoving the bag deep into my pocket. But as I turned, the door to the laundry room swung open. Stephanie stood there. She was holding a basket of her own expensive yoga clothes. She froze when she saw me. Her eyes went from my face to the pile of dirty laundry scattered on the floor around my knees. "What are you doing?" she asked. Her voice wasn't loud. It was low and disgusted. My heart hammered against my ribs. The bag was in my pocket, but my hand was still lingering near it. I had to think fast. I had to sell the lie. I couldn't find my handkerchief, I stammered, letting my jaw hang loose. I spilled some tea in the study. I needed a rag. Stephanie looked at the mess. She looked at me, a 68-year-old man crouching among dirty laundry. "You are digging through dirty underwear for a rag?" she asked, her lip curling in revulsion. "I didn't know where the clean ones were," I whined. injecting a note of pathetic confusion into my voice. "You fired the maid. Everything is moved. I am just trying to clean up." She stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. I waited for her to demand I empty my pockets. I waited for her to scream. Instead, she just laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of laughter. "Look at you," she said, shaking her head. "The great Gordon Blake, digging in the trash. You have finally found your level, haven't you?" She walked over to the washing machine, dumped her basket in, and started the cycle. She didn't even look at me again. "Get out," she said over her shoulder, "and wash your hands. You are disgusting." I scrambled to my feet, keeping my head down. "I am sorry, Stephanie. I am sorry." I shuffled out of the room past the kitchen and back toward the stairs. I felt dirty. I felt small. Her words burned like acid. But as I climbed the stairs, clutching the railing, I felt the plastic bag crinkle against my leg. I had the sample. I made it to my room and locked the door. I leaned against it, closing my eyes, waiting for my heart rate to slow down. I walked to the window and looked out at the gray sky. I pulled the bag out and held it up to the light. That tiny strand of hair. It looked so fragile. I wanted to cry. I realized then that I wasn't crying because of the humiliation in the laundry room. I wasn't crying because of Stephanie's cruelty. I was crying because I was about to destroy my family. If this test came back negative, Tyler wasn't my grandson. He was a stranger. A stranger I had loved for 5 years. A stranger I had read bedtime stories to. A stranger whose scraped knees I had bandaged. Could I turn that love off? Could I look at him and see only the fraud, and if I did expose them, what would happen to him? Connor and Stephanie would go to jail. Tyler would go where foster care. The system I was about to orphan the boy I loved, to save the company I built. The weight of it crushed me. I sank into the armchair, clutching the bag to my chest. "Forgive me, Tyler," I whispered. "Forgive me for what I am about to do." But then I looked at the photo of Martha on my nightstand. I remembered the $3 million stolen from the pension fund. I remembered Henderson being fired without a severance. I remembered the look in Stephanie's eyes when she pushed me. They were monsters. And if I didn't stop them, they would raise Tyler to be a monster too. I wasn't just saving the company. I was saving the boy from them, even if it meant he would never call me Grandpa again. I took a deep breath. I wiped my eyes. I pulled out the burner phone. "Evan," I texted. "I have the package. Meet me at the drop point in 20 minutes. I put the phone away. I stood up and went to the bathroom to wash my face. I scrubbed my skin until it was red, trying to wash away the feeling of the laundry room, trying to wash away the guilt. When I looked in the mirror, the confused old man was gone. The eyes staring back were cold. They were the eyes of a man who had made his choice. I would get the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked away the seconds of my life, each swing of the pendulum sounding like the heartbeat of a condemned man. I sat in my study, the door locked, the curtains drawn against the afternoon gray. I was not waiting for an executioner. I was waiting for the truth. And sometimes the truth is sharper than any axe. It had been 24 hours since I handed the Ziploc bag containing the strands of Tyler's hair to Evan. 24 hours of silence. 24 hours of watching Stephanie parade around the house, barking orders at the new cleaning crew, measuring the windows for new drapes, acting as if the war was already over, and she was just arranging the furniture in her new kingdom. She ignored me completely, treating me like a ghost that hadn't realized it was dead yet. At 3 o'clock precisely, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. It wasn't Evan. It was Arthur Caldwell. Caldwell had been my personal attorney and best friend for 40 years. We had fought lawsuits together. We had buried our wives together. He was the only man on earth who knew where all the bodies were buried because he had helped me dig the graves. If he was coming personally, instead of calling the news, was catastrophic. I went to the side door to let him in, bypassing the security system Stephanie had installed. I led him straight to the study. Caldwell looked older than I remembered. His face was grim, etched with lines of worry that hadn't been there last week. He carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy, burdened with the weight of what was inside. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was holding up. He just walked to the desk, placed the briefcase on the leather blotter, and sat down heavily in the wingback chair. "Do you want a drink?" I asked. "You are going to need one," he replied. His voice was gravelly. I poured 2 fingers of scotch into a crystal glass. My hand was steady. I had passed the point of nervousness. I was now in the eye of the storm. Caldwell opened the briefcase. He pulled out a thick, sealed envelope from the genetic testing lab. He held it for a moment, his thumb tracing the red confidential stamp. "Gordon," he said softly, "before I open this, I need to ask you one thing. Are you sure you want to know? Because once this paper is out of the envelope, there is no going back. The family you thought you had will be gone." "Open it, Arthur," I said. He sliced the envelope open with a silver letter opener. The sound of tearing paper was deafening in the quiet room. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the mahogany desk toward me. I looked at it. It was a mess of charts and markers, scientific jargon that meant nothing to a layman. But at the bottom of the page in bold black ink was the summary. Probability of paternal grandparentage, 0.00%. 0. Not 1%. Not a margin of error. 0. I stared at the number. I felt a physical blow to my chest, as if someone had swung a sledgehammer into my ribs. I couldn't breathe. The room tilted. Tyler. My little explorer. The boy I had taught to fish. The boy whose laughter was the only thing that made the silence of this big house bearable. He wasn't mine. He wasn't Martha's. He was a stranger. I closed my eyes and a tear leaked out hot and burning. I wasn't crying for the betrayal. I was crying for the loss. I was mourning a grandson who was still alive playing in the room next door, but who had just ceased to exist in my world. "It gets worse, Gordon." I opened my eyes. Caldwell was reaching into his briefcase again. "How can it get worse?" I whispered. "My daughter-in-law had an affair. She passed off another man's child as my heir. It is a tale as old as time." "No," Caldwell said, his voice hardening. "That is what I thought too. I thought Stephanie had strayed and Connor was the victim. I thought maybe your son was a cuckold who had been duped into raising a bastard child. So I did some digging. I used my clearance as the executor of the trust to pull Connor's full medical history. I wanted to see if he knew." He slid a second file across the desk. It was an old medical file from a clinic in Switzerland. It was dated 10 years ago. "Read the diagnosis," Caldwell said. I put on my glasses. I read the clinical notes. Patient Connor Blake. Diagnosis: congenital bilateral absence of the vas deferens. I looked up at Caldwell, confused. "What does this mean?" "It is a genetic condition, Gordon. It means he was born without the tubes that carry sperm. It means he is sterile. Completely, irreversibly sterile. He has known since he was 28 years old. The implications crashed into me like a freight train. If Connor knew he was sterile 10 years ago, then he knew from the very first moment Stephanie told him she was pregnant that it was a lie. He knew Tyler couldn't be his. He wasn't a victim," I realized, my voice rising in horror. "He wasn't tricked." "No," Caldwell said. "He was a co-conspirator." I stood up, knocking my chair back. I paced the room, my mind reeling. This wasn't just a desperate wife trying to secure her future. This was a partnership. My son, my own flesh and blood, had looked me in the eye when Tyler was born. He had let me hold that baby. He had let me cry tears of joy. He had let me set up a $50 million trust fund. And all the while he knew. He knew it was all a performance. They planned it, I hissed. They found a donor. Or she got pregnant by someone else, and instead of leaving her, he used it. They used that child as a key to unlock the vault. Exactly, Caldwell said. The Blake Family Trust has a strict lineage clause. You wrote it yourself, Gordon. To prevent hostile takeovers or dilution of shares, the controlling interest only passes to a direct biological descendant. Without a biological child, Connor only gets a stipend. With a child, he gets the empire. They manufactured an heir, I said, the rage finally overtaking the grief. They didn't want a family. They wanted a prop. And they are about to cash it in, Caldwell reminded me. The board meeting is tomorrow at 9. Stephanie has already drafted the transfer documents. She has the digital forgeries of your signature ready to cover the embezzlement. Once you sign the company over to Connor, they will trigger the trust fund for Tyler. They will have access to everything. And you will be in a locked room in Florida within 48 hours. I stopped pacing. I walked to the window and looked out. I saw Stephanie in the garden directing the landscapers. She looked powerful. She looked untouchable. She thought she had won. She had underestimated one thing. She thought she was fighting a lonely, sentimental old man. She didn't realize she was fighting the man who built this city from steel and concrete. I turned back to Caldwell. Do you have the papers, I asked? Which papers? The new will, and the revocation of the power of attorney, and the evidence file Evan compiled last night. Caldwell patted his briefcase. I have everything. I also took the liberty of contacting the district attorney. He is an old friend. He is expecting a call. Not yet, I said. I don't want them arrested quietly in the night. That is too good for them. I want them to feel what I felt. I want them to think they have won. I want them to reach for the crown and feel the blade instead. I reached for the phone on my desk. My hand didn't shake. My heart didn't flutter. I felt cold. Ice cold. It was a beautiful feeling. It was the absence of doubt. I dialed Stephanie's cell phone number. I watched through the window as she stopped talking to the landscaper and looked at her screen. She hesitated, then answered. What is it, Gordon? She snapped. I am busy cleaning up your mess. Stephanie, I said. My voice sounded different. It was the voice I used in negotiations when I was about to crush a competitor. But to her, it probably just sounded like resignation. I have been thinking, I continued. You are right. I am tired. I am confused. I don't want to fight anymore. I saw her shoulders relax. A smile spread across her face. Finally, she said, a moment of clarity. Yes, I said. Call the board. Tell them the meeting is on for tomorrow morning. Tell Connor to bring the papers. I am ready to sign. Good, she said. It is for the best, Gordon. You will see. We will take good care of you. I am sure you will, I said. I hung up the phone. I looked at Caldwell. He was smiling a thin, shark-like smile. So it begins, he said. Yes, I replied, looking at the DNA test on the desk. The piece of paper that had erased my grandson and saved my soul. Tomorrow morning, I am not just signing a contract, Arthur. I am signing their death warrants, and I am going to use my own pen. I picked up the Mont Blanc from the desk, the same pen Connor had tried to force into my hand days ago. Get the car ready, Arthur. We have a show to put on. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the study into darkness. But I didn't turn on the light. I sat there in the dark, holding the evidence of my son's betrayal, waiting for the dawn. The architect was done designing. It was time for the demolition. The double doors of the executive boardroom on the 45th floor were made of solid oak, hand-carved by a master carpenter I had hired in 1985. I remembered the day they were installed. I remembered the smell of the varnish and the pride I felt knowing that behind those doors, I would build a legacy for my family. Now, as I stood before them, they felt like the gates to a slaughterhouse, and I was the cattle. I adjusted my tie, checking my reflection in the polished brass handle. I made sure the knot was slightly crooked. I made sure my collar was unbuttoned just enough to look sloppy. I hunched my shoulders, letting the weight of my 68 years press down on me until I looked smaller, frailer. The architect was gone. The senile old man had taken his place. I pushed the doors open. The conversation inside died instantly. It was a large room dominated by a 30-foot mahogany table that gleamed under the recessed lighting. 20 people were seated around it. Half of them were the legitimate board members, men and women I had worked with for decades. They looked down at their papers, refusing to meet my eyes. They were ashamed. They knew what was happening. They knew a coup when they saw one, but they were too afraid for their own stock options to intervene. The other half of the room was filled with strangers. Men in expensive suits that fit a little too tightly. Men with cold eyes and heavy watches. I recognized the type. They weren't investors. They were the people Connor owed money to. He had invited his creditors to the handover, likely to prove to them that the payout was imminent, that the golden goose was finally on the chopping block. At the head of the table sat Connor. He was sweating. Even in the climate-controlled air of the office, a sheen of perspiration coated his upper lip. He was tapping a gold pen against the table, a nervous staccato rhythm that betrayed his panic. Stephanie stood behind him, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. She looked radiant. She was wearing a white power suit that was sharp enough to cut glass. When she saw me, her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a predator's baring of teeth. "You are late, Gordon," she announced, her voice echoing in the silent room. "We told you 9 o'clock. It is 9:05. I hope you didn't get lost in the elevator again." A few of the strangers chuckled. The board members shifted uncomfortably. I shuffled into the room, dragging my feet on the plush carpet. I clutched my old leather briefcase to my chest like a shield. I couldn't find my other shoe," I mumbled, looking down at my feet. I was wearing a mismatched pair of socks. One black, one dark blue. It was a calculated detail. Stephanie walked around the table, her heels clicking loudly. She stopped in front of me and looked me up and down with open disgust. She reached out and flicked the lapel of my jacket. It was a tweed jacket I had bought 20 years ago. It was perfectly serviceable, but in this room of Italian silk, it looked ancient. God. "Gordon," she sighed loud enough for everyone to hear. "You smell like a thrift store. Did you even dry clean this, or did you just pull it out of a mothball box in the attic?" "It is my favorite jacket," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Martha liked this jacket." Stephanie rolled her eyes, turning to the audience. "See what we are dealing with," she said, gesturing to me as if I were a museum exhibit. "He is living in the past. He holds on to garbage because he can't process the present. It is sad, really. But we can't let sentimentality run a Fortune 500 company." She placed a hand on my back and pushed me really toward the empty chair at the opposite end of the table from Connor. "Sit down, Gordon. Let's get this over with before you need a nap." I sank into the chair. It felt too big for me now. I looked down the long expanse of the table. Connor was staring at me. His eyes were wide, pleading and threatening at the same time. He needed this signature. He needed it like a drowning man needs air. The legal documents were already set out in front of me. A stack of paper 3 inches thick. The transfer of ownership. The resignation letter. The release of the trust. "Let's skip the reading," Connor said quickly, his voice tight. "Dad knows the terms. We discussed it. We are just formalizing the transition so we can modernize the strategy." One of the men in the tight suits leaned forward. A man with a scar above his eyebrow. "We are all very eager to see the new strategy, Mr. Blake," the man said. His voice was smooth, but there was a razor blade hidden in the tone. "Very eager." Connor flinched. He knew exactly what that meant. Sign or we break your legs. Just sign it, Dad, Connor said, pushing a second gold pen across the polished wood toward me. It spun and stopped perfectly within my reach. I reached for the pen. My hand shook. I let it shake violently. My fingers fumbled, knocking the pen askew before I managed to grasp it. Look at him, Stephanie sneered from behind Connor. He can't even hold a pen. His motor skills are gone. How can he hold the reins of a corporation? I looked up at her. I saw the triumph in her face. She wasn't just taking my money. She was enjoying stripping me of my dignity. She wanted this audience to see me as weak, so that when they threw me in the home, no one would ask questions. I gripped the pen tighter. The shaking stopped for a split second, then started again. Is Tyler coming? I asked, my voice cracking. I wanted to see him. You said if I signed... Stephanie laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. Tyler is at school, Gordon. He doesn't need to see this. He doesn't need to see his grandfather giving up. Just sign the paper. Do it for him. If you sign, we will make sure he has everything he needs. Everything he needs, I repeated softly. Yes, Connor hissed, leaning forward. Hurry up, Dad. Your hand is shaking all over the place. You are embarrassing yourself. Just make your mark. An X will do if you can't remember your name. An X, That was what I had become to them. A variable to be solved. An obstacle to be crossed out. I looked at the signature line. I, Gordon Blake, being of sound mind and body. I looked at the board members. They were looking at their watches. They just wanted to go to lunch. They didn't care that a crime was being committed in plain sight. I looked at the creditors. They just wanted their $3 million. And I looked at my son. My sterile, lying, thieving son. I took a deep breath. The air in the room tasted recycled and stale. You are right, Connor, I said. My voice was suddenly steady. It was quiet, but it carried to the corners of the room. The tremor in my hand vanished. I set the pen down on the table with a deliberate click. My hand is shaking. I continued lifting my head. I took off the glasses that I didn't actually need. I looked straight into Connor's eyes. But it isn't shaking because I am old son, and it isn't shaking because I am sick. The room went deadly silent. Stephanie's smile faltered. Connor froze. It is shaking, I said, my voice dropping an octave, returning to the baritone that had commanded construction sites for 40 years, because I am holding back the urge to strangle you. Stephanie took a step back. What did you say? I stood up. I didn't push myself up with my arms. I stood up straight, unfolding to my full height of 6'2". I buttoned my jacket. I fixed my tie. I said, I am not signing. Not today. Not ever. Connor stood up, knocking his chair over. Dad, sit down. You are having an episode. Stephanie, call security. He is losing it. I am not losing it. Connor, I roared. My voice bounced off the oak paneling. I have found it. I reached down and picked up my briefcase. I didn't open it with fumbling fingers. I snapped the latches open with precision. I looked at the door. Come in, Arthur, I shouted. The double doors swung open. Arthur Caldwell walked in, followed not by nurses, but by 2 uniformed officers from the grand jury division. And that is when the sweating really started. The silence that followed Arthur Caldwell's entrance was not the silence of a library. It was the silence of a bomb squad watching a timer tick down to 0. The air was sucked out of the room. The 2 uniformed officers stood by the door, their faces impassive, their hands resting loosely on their belts. They were not here to make a scene yet. They were here to ensure the doors stayed closed. Arthur walked to the table with the slow, deliberate stride of a man who knows he holds the winning hand. He didn't look at Connor. He didn't look at Stephanie. He placed his heavy leather briefcase on the table right on top of the transfer documents Stephanie had prepared. The thud echoed like a gavel strike. Stephanie was the first to find her voice. It was shrill, lacking the smooth confidence she had worn just moments ago. "Who are these people, Gordon? This is a private board meeting. You cannot just march police into a corporate office." "Security." "Sit down." "Stephanie," I said. My voice was low, but it cut through her panic like a knife through silk. "No one is coming. Security works for the CEO, and as of this moment, that is still me." Connor looked at the officers, then at me. His face was gray, the color of wet ash. "Dad, what is going on?" "We are just trying to help you." "Why are you doing this?" "Helping me," I repeated, savoring the irony. "Is that what you call it?" Arthur clicked the latches of his briefcase. He pulled out the single sheet of paper from the genetic lab. He slid it across the polished mahogany until it rested directly in front of the board members. I picked it up. I put on my glasses slowly, deliberately. I saw the creditors leaning in. The man with the scar looked interested for the first time. "You asked me to sign for the sake of the future," I said, addressing the room. "You said the company needs a legacy. You said the trust fund must be unlocked to secure our financial stability." I looked at Connor. He was trembling. He knew what paper I was holding. He had to know. "Article 14 of the Blake Family Trust," I recited from memory. "The controlling interest and the corpus of the $50 million fund shall only pass to a direct biological descendant of Gordon and Martha Blake." I paused. I let the words hang in the air. "This document," I continued, holding up the lab report, "is a DNA analysis, comparing my genetic markers with those of Tyler Blake." Stephanie lunged forward. "Do not read that it is private. It is a violation of a minor's rights. I will sue you." One of the officers stepped forward, just a single step, but it was enough to freeze her in place. I looked at the paper. I read the words that had broken my heart yesterday, but today they were my weapon. The probability of paternity, and therefore grandparentage, is 0%. Tyler Blake shares no genetic material with the Blake family line. A gasp went around the table. The board members looked at each other, whispering furiously. The creditors looked at Connor with eyes that were suddenly very, very cold. Connor sank into his chair. He looked small. He looked like a child caught stealing candy, except the candy was an empire. I turned to him. "You knew, didn't you, son? I... Connor stammered. "He didn't know," Stephanie shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "How dare you? This is a fabrication. You forged this because you hate me. You hate that your son loves me more than he loves you. Tyler is his son. This test is a lie." Arthur Caldwell cleared his throat. He reached into his briefcase again. "If the DNA test is a lie, Mrs. Blake, perhaps this medical record from the Zurich clinic is also a lie." He produced the second file, the 10-year-old diagnosis. He slid it to the chairman of the board, a man named Henderson, who had known me for 30 years. "Read it." "George," Frank said. George Henderson adjusted his spectacles. He read the file. He looked up at Connor, his expression shifting from confusion to disgust. "It says here that Connor Blake was diagnosed with congenital sterility 10 years ago." George said, his voice flat. "It says conception is biologically impossible." The room erupted. Stephanie's face went white. Her narrative was crumbling. Her victimhood was evaporating. "You knew," I said to Connor, my voice rising over the noise. "You knew before you married her. You knew before you announced the pregnancy. You looked me in the eye. You looked your mother in the eye, and you let us weep with joy over a lie. You let us build a nursery for a stranger. You let us sign over millions in trust funds for a child you knew had no claim to them." Connor put his head in his hands. I had to, Dad. You wanted an heir. You wouldn't stop talking about the legacy. I couldn't give it to you. I didn't want to disappoint you. Disappoint me. I laughed a harsh, bitter sound. You didn't do this to make me happy, Connor. You did it to unlock the trust fund. You did it for the money. Speaking of money, Arthur interrupted. He pulled out a laptop and connected it to the boardroom's main projector. The screen descended from the ceiling. Stephanie tried to rally. She smoothed her hair, her eyes darting around the room looking for an exit strategy. So what, she hissed. So we adopted a child and didn't tell you, is that a crime? We wanted a family. We were going to tell you eventually. That doesn't make Connor unfit to run the company. It makes him a loving father who stepped up. A loving father, I repeated. And I suppose a loving son also steals from his father's employees. The projector flickered to life. The spreadsheet from the server room appeared. It was massive, rows and rows of red numbers. What is this? Stephanie whispered. This, I said, pointing at the screen, is the forensic accounting of the last 18 months. I picked up a laser pointer. The red dot danced across the screen. Here is a transfer for $50,000 to a shell company in Nevada. Here is $100,000 to a crypto exchange in Malta. And here is the $3 million missing from the employee pension fund. The board members gasped. The pension fund was sacred. Touching it was not just unethical. It was federal prison time. Connor looked up. He was crying now. Silent, terrified tears. And look at the authorization, I said. Arthur clicked a button. The image zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the withdrawal slip. Gordon Blake. It is your signature, Stephanie screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at me. You signed it. You are the thief. You are trying to frame us. I looked at her. I admired her tenacity. She was sinking on the Titanic and still trying to rearrange the deck chairs. That is exactly what you planned to say, isn't it? I asked softly. You planned to tell the auditors that the senile old man did it, that I lost my mind and gambled away the money. That is why you needed me in the nursing home, to keep me quiet, to medicate me until I couldn't remember my own name, let alone a transaction. I turned to Arthur. Show them the metadata. Arthur clicked again. A new window popped up. It showed the digital footprint of the signature. This signature was created using a digital stamp, Arthur explained to the room. The stamp was accessed from a laptop with the IP address ending in 492. That device is registered to Connor Blake. And the timestamps, they correspond to times when Gordon Blake was verifiably elsewhere, at the doctor, at the cemetery, asleep. I looked at the creditors. The men in the tight suits were standing up now. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at Connor. They realized that the $3 million they were promised was gone. It was stolen money, and the police were at the door. They started to back away, slipping out the side exit, realizing this ship was going down fast. Connor saw them leave. His last hope of protection vanished. It wasn't me, Connor wailed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. It was her. It was Stephanie. She told me to do it. She said we needed the capital to cover the losses, she said. Dad would never notice, you coward. Stephanie shrieked, turning on him. She slapped him. A hard, vicious slap that echoed in the silent room. You spineless little worm. You are going to blame me. I did this for us. I did this to fix your mistakes. She turned to the board, her eyes wide and manic. He is a gambler, she yelled, pointing at her husband. He lost it all. I was just trying to save the house. I was trying to save the image. I stood there watching them tear each other apart. It was ugly. It was pathetic. But it was necessary. Enough, I said. The room fell silent again. You wanted the company, Connor. You wanted the house, Stephanie. You wanted the legacy. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my old battered wallet. I took out a $10 bill. I tossed it onto the mahogany table. It fluttered down and landed between them. There, I said. That is your inheritance. It is enough for a cab ride to the police station. Arthur nodded to the officers. Gentlemen, he said, you have the evidence. You have the confession. I believe your work here is just beginning. As the officers moved forward, taking out their handcuffs, Stephanie lunged for the door, but she wasn't fast enough. The first officer caught her arm. She screamed a primal sound of rage and denial. Connor didn't run. He just sat there weeping, staring at the $10 bill on the table. I turned my back on them. I walked to the window and looked out at the city I had helped build. The sun was breaking through the clouds. The storm was over. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was George Henderson, the chairman. Gordon, he said quietly. We didn't know. We are so sorry. I know, George, I said, not turning around. But knowing isn't enough. You have a lot of work to do to rebuild this trust. I picked up my briefcase. I walked past my son, who was being read his rights. I walked past my daughter-in-law, who was spitting curses at the police. I walked out of the double doors. I didn't look back. The senile old man was gone forever. The architect had cleared the site. Now it was time to build something new, something real. And I knew exactly who was going to help me lay the first stone. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut is a distinct mechanical noise. It cuts through the air sharper than any scream. I watched as the officers pulled Connor's hands behind his back. He didn't fight them. He just slumped his expensive suit, bunching up at the shoulders, looking like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Stephanie, however, was still thrashing, spitting venom at the officers, threatening to have their badges, threatening to sue the department, threatening to burn the whole world down. It was over. The threat was neutralized. But I had one last nail to drive into the coffin of their ambition. I turned to Arthur Caldwell. Read them the final clause, I said. Arthur nodded. He didn't need to look at the paper. He knew the Blake family trust by heart. He looked over the rim of his glasses at my son. Under the integrity provision of the estate bylaws, Arthur recited, his voice calm and professional. Any beneficiary found to have engaged in criminal activity against the company or who attempts to defraud the trust through falsified documents is immediately and irrevocably disinherited. Connor looked up, his eyes red and swollen. Disinherited, but the house, the cars, all of it, I said, stepping closer to him. The house belongs to the trust. The cars are leased by the company. Even the clothes on your back were paid for with a credit card that I just canceled this morning. I leaned in, wanting him to hear every syllable. You are leaving this room with nothing. Connor, no golden parachute, no settlement, no safety net. You are going to prison as a pauper. And when you get out, if you get out, you will have to do something you have never done in your life. You will have to work. Dad, please, Connor wailed, the reality finally piercing his delusion. I am your flesh and blood. You can't leave me with nothing. I made a mistake. I am sorry. I will pay it back. I looked at him. I looked for the little boy who used to sit on my shoulders and watch the parade. I looked for the teenager I taught to drive. I looked for the young man I walked down the aisle. I couldn't find them. All I saw was a stranger who had looked at my life's work and saw only a piggy bank to be smashed. I shook my head slowly. It is not about the money, Connor. I said, my voice heavy with a lifetime of regret. I could have forgiven the debt. I could have earned another $3 million. Money is just paper. It burns. It tears. It can be replaced. I paused, feeling the tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. What I cannot replace is the trust I had in you. What I cannot forgive is that you looked me in the eye and lied about my grandson. You weaponized a child against me. You tried to bury me alive in a nursing home just so you could keep gambling. I don't regret the money I lost when I whispered the words hanging heavy in the silent room. I regret that for 38 years I warmed a viper in my bosom thinking it was a son. I regret that I watered a weed thinking it was a flower. I signaled to the officers. Take them away. No, Dad, Connor screamed as they dragged him toward the door. I didn't watch them leave. I turned back to the window, staring out at the skyline. I heard the double doors close with a heavy thud. The room was quiet again. The board members were shifting in their seats, uncomfortable, terrified. I turned around and looked at the empty chairs at the head of the table. They were gone. The parasites had been removed. The host had survived. But as I looked at my trembling hands, I knew that survival came with a cost. I was the king of the castle again, but the castle had never felt so empty. The wail of the police sirens faded into the distance, swallowed by the hum of the city below. The boardroom was quiet again, but the air felt different now. It was lighter. The heavy fog of lies that had suffocated this building for years had finally lifted, leaving behind a stark, clean reality. The chair at the head of the table was empty. The golden pen Connor had tried to force into my hand lay on the mahogany surface, abandoned and useless. I looked at the board members. These men and women captains of industry looked shaken. They were waiting for me to speak. They were waiting for the old lion to roar one last time, or perhaps they expected me to collapse under the weight of what I had just done. I had just sent my only son to prison. A weaker man might have broken. But I did not feel weak. I felt a strange, sorrowful clarity. Gentlemen, I said, leaning my hands on the table, we have a vacancy, and we have a mess to clean up. But before we talk about stock prices or damage control, there is one more introduction I need to make. I pressed the intercom button on the phone console. Evan, could you come in, please? The double doors opened. Evan walked in. He was not wearing an Italian suit. He was wearing a simple blazer and slacks, clutching his backpack, the same backpack that had carried the evidence that saved my life. He looked nervous, his eyes darting from the stunned board members to me. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like exactly what he was, a young man who worked hard, kept his head down, and possessed a conscience that could not be bought. Come here, son, I said, gesturing to the spot next to me. Evan approached tentatively. Mr. Blake, is everything okay? Everything is finally as it should be, I replied. I turned to the board. You all know Evan as my assistant. You know him as the voice on the phone who schedules your meetings. But you do not know who he really is. I placed a hand on Evan's shoulder. He stiffened slightly, surprised by the contact. 30 years ago, my wife Martha started a quiet sponsorship program at the St. Jude's Home for Boys. She didn't want fanfare. She just wanted to help. Over the years, she supported dozens of children. But there was one boy who wrote back every single month. He didn't write asking for money. He wrote to tell her about his grades. He wrote to tell her about the books he was reading. He wrote to ask for advice on how to be a good man in a world that didn't seem to care about him. I looked at Evan. His eyes were wide, shining with unshed tears. He knew I knew, but he didn't know I was going to share it. Martha never met him in person, I continued, my voice softening. She was afraid of overstepping boundaries, but she kept every letter. And when she got sick, she asked me to do one thing. She asked me to hire him. She said, Gordon, give him a chance. Not a handout. Just a chance. Let's see if the man matches the letters. I looked around the room. I hired Evan 5 years ago. I watched him. I tested him. I gave him the keys to my most private matters. And while my own son, who had every advantage in the world, was stealing from the pension fund to play roulette, this young man who came from nothing was working late nights to protect this company. I paused, letting the weight of the truth settle over them. Family is not about blood, I said firmly. I learned that the hard way today. Family is about loyalty. It is about shared values. It is about who stands beside you when the storm comes, not who pushes you into the rain. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the keys to the executive suite. I placed them in Evan's hand. I am appointing Evan Davis as the interim CEO of Blake & Associates, effective immediately. I will remain as chairman to guide him, but he will lead us. He has the moral compass this company lost. And more importantly, he has my trust. The room was silent for a heartbeat. Then George Henderson stood up. He buttoned his jacket, looked at Evan, and nodded. Then he started to clap. Slowly at first, then the others joined in. It wasn't polite applause. It was the applause of relief. They saw what I saw. They saw a future that wasn't built on fraud. I patted Evan on the back. "Breathe, son," I whispered. "You earned this." I didn't stay for the meeting. I left Evan to handle the questions. He was ready. I walked out of the boardroom past the empty reception desk and into the elevator. As the doors closed, shutting out the world of high finance and betrayal, I leaned my head back against the cool metal wall and closed my eyes. I was tired. But it was a good tired. It was the exhaustion of a man who has finished a long, hard day's work. When I reached the lobby, the car was waiting, but I didn't get in the back. I opened the front passenger door and slid in. The driver looked surprised, but I just smiled. "Let's go," I said. "Where to, Mr. Blake?" "The penthouse, no," I said, looking out at the bustling city streets one last time. "Take me to the lake house, the small one. I think it is time I started that garden Martha always wanted." As the car pulled away, leaving the towering skyscraper of Blake & Associates in the rearview mirror, I didn't feel a sense of loss. I felt lighter. I had lost a son, yes, and that wound would always leave a scar. But I had found something else. I had found the truth. I had found justice. And in a young man named Evan, I had found that legacy isn't what you leave behind in a bank account. It is the lives you touch and the people you raise up. I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face. The storm was over, and for the first time in a long time, the sun felt warm. I spent 40 years building skyscrapers, believing that a strong foundation required a shared name and bloodline. I was wrong. The hardest lesson of my life wasn't found in a blueprint, but in a betrayal. I learned that true family isn't defined by the DNA we share, but by the loyalty we show when the storms come. Blood makes you related, but only integrity makes you family. It is never too late to demolish a toxic past and build a future with those who truly deserve a place at your table. Sometimes you have to lose a son to find a true heir. If you were in my shoes, would you have given Connor a second chance, or was cutting him off the only way to save the legacy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe that loyalty is thicker than blood, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. See you in the next one.